most of the Christians that were okay with evolution, and we kind of point to, the thing that gave them all pause was Adam and Eve. And how does that fit into this? Yes, my book's part of a larger historical conversation. It's a story that you're part of too. We could start the story 500 years ago with the discovery of the New World, like Ken Keathley does, but I don't want to spend too much time talking, and maybe you can ask some questions about that. But we can just start with, Darwin writing The Origin of the Species, and, was it 1958? And then a few years later in sorry, did I say 19? I meant 18. And then 1860, Huxley writing Man's Place in Nature, which extended all of the Origin of the Species. The Origin of the Species doesn't talk about human evolution, but Huxley was an atheist, aggressively so, and he said, no, man's place in nature is that there's no image of God, nothing like that. We are nothing more than just an upright ape. And, the church tried to navigate this, but very quickly, a lot of stuff became easy. It was actually easier for them than it was for us. Like, when it came to the age of the earth, that was already something that was been settled a long time before. That's not a big issue. The idea of animal death outside, that was not on anyone's radar, really, except for a Seventh-day Adventist, because it's just not a historical position of the church that there was no animal death before Adam and Eve's fall. So that wasn't a problem. And, the idea of God creating by a process of common descent, animals and plants was just not a problem. The real sticking point, what Williams Jennings Bryan has the entire focus of, the Scopes trial on in 1925, just a little bit under 100 years ago, is human evolution. That's what gave most of the Christians that were okay with evolution, and we kind of point to, the thing that gave them all pause was Adam and Eve. And how does that fit into this? And that's kind of been the stable position we've been in. And so, and that's where I was too, because remember I told you I was coming at this from a scriptural point of view. And of course I was seduced by things like intelligent design and scientific apologetics. But when you kind of strip away all of that stuff and realize that God already proved that he exists by raising Jesus from the dead, you're still kind of left with this thing. It really does seem like it's talking about humans all coming from Adam and Eve, right? It's helpful also to not approach this merely from a textual point of view, but to also look at church tradition. And I think that makes the problem more difficult because you see that most Christians through history have understood Adam and Eve with three things, okay? They were fairly recent in history, so let's just say less than 10,000 years ago, okay? They were de novo created without parents, all right? And they were ancestors of everyone. Those three things, okay? And there's different theology and different traditions that get attached to all that stuff. But so these weren't just merely factual statements. These are all three of them end up being like theologically potent. And people are willing to give up a lot of things. I mean, there was, from very early on, there's a lot of questions about how to interpret Genesis 1. I mean, going back and reading Augustine was really helpful for me in realizing that, okay, there's actually a pretty broad range of views that have nothing to do with the challenge of science, because Augustine is presenting these views long before science challenged us, right? But this question of Adam and Eve is just a common thread. It has to do not merely with what Genesis says, but also what 1 Corinthians says and Romans 5 says, and the genealogies of Jesus and all of that, where it seems to be not merely an incidental part of how people read Genesis. It's just rather actually how most people have read Genesis and understood it to be theologically important. So we're now supposed to get rid of this. Now, this conversation has been really hard for the church because the word from scientists, even Christian scientists, has been that science definitively disproves Adam and Eve. Maybe you can kind of cling on to some vestige of it, but you got to give up at least one of those three things, if not more than those, or all of those. And actually there's even groups of Christians that argue right now to understand them in a purely mythological way. Now, are they still Christians? I think we need to be clear. They still are Christians. and they might even be having a faithful view, meaning that they're reading Scripture the best they can, and that's what they're coming to, okay? So that's not the issue, but But I think the part that made me uncomfortable with that is that, especially as I looked at church history, that was such a departure, such a revision of how Christians have read Genesis for so long, that it just really seemed to be like a premature collapse of the tension, right? Anyways, so I wasn't sure about that. That was part of the stuff I was working through. But anyways, what I found out, and this was actually something that was a surprise to a lot of scientists, is when you actually look at the science closely, and let's just say that evolution is true. Okay, now, I understand some of you are saying there, but evolution is false. All right, let's call it science fiction then. All right, we've gone through the wardrobe. We're in another universe. And in this universe, evolution is true, okay? And they have the same Bible we do. Is it in conflict? We can ask that question, right? Now, if you're a philosopher here, this is like a modal question, right? About the potential compatibility between claims. It's not actually a statement about whether they're true or not. Does that make sense? We can ask that. And everyone, like I said, whether you're a traditional Christian, a revisionist Christian, a young earth creationist, old earth creationist, atheist, for the longest time has said that if that's what we mean by Adam and Eve, that's in conflict with evolution, by which we mean, that we all descend from Adam and Eve. Not that. That's not what evolution is. That we have common descent with the great apes, and that we rise from a large population. Like, those things can't be true. Like, you got to give up on something, right? It turns out that everyone made a mistake. That's actually not the case. If you actually look at the evidence, both those things can be true at the same time. Okay. So let's pause for a moment and think about what that means if that's true. That means that over the last 160 years, more than that, like, the key conflict between the church and evolution has been an illusion.